In today's video, we're going to be building this cool shelving unit, but with a little twist. No joinery. Stick around, you're not going to want to miss this one. My fiance and I moved into this house a couple of months ago. And when you set up a house, you kind of just throw things together. And this corner of the living room was no exception. We leaned the mirror up against the wall, put this little stand in front of it, and haven't thought about it since. And when coming up with ideas for the YouTube channel, I thought this space would be perfect for a little shelving unit, but with a little twist. I'm not going to use any joinery. So without further ado, let's head down to the wood shop. Alright, so to get this party started, I have some 4/4 cherry, which I picked up at a local lumber yard here in Pittsburgh. I need to send these through the joiner and planer, and I don't want to send them through as 8-foot sections, so I'm just marking some rough lines of where I need to cut these down. Fans of the channel will be excited to see that I have a miter saw now. Up until this point, I've been making these kind of cuts on my table saw. I laid out some scrap 2x4 to catch some of the bigger pieces of wood, and then hooked up the dust collection with a very sophisticated system. Then it was just a matter of slicing all the pieces down before heading over to the joiner and planer. This part's a little repetitive and doesn't require narration the whole time, so I figured I'd let you in on why I'm not using joinery for this project. I drew some inspiration online, and when I landed on this design, I knew I was going to need some dominoes for the joints. So I asked my shop hand to pick some up, because what else are shop hands good for? It's been a few weeks and he still hasn't picked up the dominoes, but I got a video to put out, so I guess I'm going to have to do this project without any joinery. I'm only going to have this piece of furniture for a few years, so I want to see the long-term effects that no joinery has on a project. And hey, if you're watching my videos in a few years, you'll get to see too. After I have all the pieces jointed, I went to try to find the thickest board to send through the planer. The reason I'm doing this is because I'll start with the thickest board and then send all the remaining boards through. Then when I adjust, I'll start at the thickest board again and keep working until all of the boards are hitting the blade. That way I can make sure they're all the same thickness. Man, look at all this sawdust. I was looking back at some old footage recently and I saw when I was making cuts before, I wasn't getting all of this sawdust everywhere. That's when it hit me. I haven't cleaned out my shop vac filter in a while. So when I took it apart, I realized there was a ton of buildup. I was able to clean it out, and so hopefully going forward, the dust collection will be a lot better. I cut all of the boards down to the same 6-inch width. Then after cleaning off the outfeed table, I grabbed a scrap piece of MDF for the glue-ups. I know the top of this surface is going to get disgusting over time, but I'd like to prolong its life as long as possible. I sorted all my pieces and then grabbed my parallel clamps. After checking to make sure the edges are straight, I set the boards up and added glue to both sides. Brush, 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 brush. And then clamped it together. The point of the parallel clamps are to keep the pieces of wood exactly at 90 degrees. While that dries, I use the time to clean the sawdust that came from the joiner. I'm looking forward to doing a project with my shop vac actually working well, since this has become a regular occurrence. After an hour in the clamps, I took the board out and then repeated the process. Glue, glue, brush, brush, clamp, clamp. Then an hour later, I did the same. Another hour. And another hour. And before I knew it, it was the next day. Using a chisel, I scraped off some of the excess glue. And then using the table saw, I cut all the pieces down to size. The outer side of the shelf and the inner support need to be the exact same height, so I decided to cut them together. But I forgot to film it, so I'm showing you here exactly what I did. So as you can see here, this shelf needs to go in the upright, so I need to cut a notch right there. I laid the boards out like this, and then knowing the excess that's on the right is what's going to get notched out of the left. And since it needs to be the exact same height as the shelf, I use the outer side as a template to know exactly how far up to cut. The reason I cut this on the table saw and not the bandsaw is because I don't have a bandsaw, and that's the only reason. And now, due to some unseasonably warm weather in Pittsburgh, I'm able to sand outside instead of in my shop, which is really nice because it saves on cleanup. When sanding, you don't want to have high and low areas. And if you pay too much attention to one area, it's going to be lower. So I found this technique online where if you use a pencil, you can cover the entire surface, and then as long as you don't stay in one spot for too long, you'll know you're done sanding when all of the pencil is gone. I sanded with 60 grit and then 120 grit. After that was done, I brought all the pieces back down to the shop and started to get all the dust off of them. Now it's time for the final glue up. I laid the pieces out just to make sure I was staying organized. I added a thick bead of glue and then set the upright right on top, using the parallel clamps to keep all the angles at 90 degrees. Wiping away the excess glue, I let that dry overnight, and then it was time to move on to the next section. Again, dry fitting everything just to make sure I don't glue the wrong pieces. I added glue. Added some more glue. Spread it out edge to edge. And clamped it all together. I used some extra clamps just to make sure everything was as strong as possible. Popped off all the clamps and then went over to glue up the final section. All of this is pretty self-explanatory. Again, I let that sit overnight, and then it was back outside for one final sand. I wanted to just make sure all of the edges were completely flush, as well as take out some of the burn marks that you can see on the side. Since I wasn't really shaping anything, I just started with the 120 and then did a final pass with 220 grit sandpaper. Next up, me and my mad scientist hair went over to add the Rubio Monocoat, my favorite finish. And just like that, another project done. Cue the cool guy montage. I'm happy with how this project turned out considering the circumstances. It's just a placeholder piece of furniture until we move to another house. I can already tell that the no joinery is going to come back to bite me. I can see some splitting already in the wood, and I think over time that's going to get worse. But this is not a load-bearing piece of furniture. At most it'll hold a vase and a couple of books. Like all projects, I learned a lot and I'm very excited to start the next one. So until next time, thank you so much for watching.